been so good. It's a treat to be here with you. Wasn't that a beautiful song and story by Mariah? Give it up one more time. That was powerful. Thank you. 2 weeks ago, I was in Dallas, and I was speaking at a men's retreat. Saturday night, the pastor asked me to speak to the students on the topic of pornography. I was walking up there, and a man, probably 40, 45, he stopped me and he pulled me in. He said, "Thank you for talking to these students about pornography." I said, "Sure, why are you thanking me?" He said, "I would give anything to go back and be in junior high or high school, and somebody just talked to me about how pornography devastates your relationships. Help me understand why God designed sex as it was." He said, "Thank you." He said, "It would have spared me decades of bad ideas that had devastating consequences on my life." Friends, my time is short tonight, so I'm going to jump right in, but I'll tell you something I believe. I believe firmly that pornography is one of the most powerful tools that Satan is using to rob you of your joy and your faith and your impact for the Lord. Friends, I'm a father. I have 3 kids. One of my 13-year-old son is here with me. Tomorrow we're going to the Museum of the Bible. Is it cool? Good. I have a 10-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son. And I can't imagine the culture that they're growing up with. And I do everything as a father to help them. In the few minutes I have today, I want to speak with you in the same way. So if you haven't figured out, my talk today is on a subject. It begins with P and it ends with orn. And it's not about popcorn, as a junior higher shouted out one time. I was like, I'm not speaking on popcorn. What I'm going to do in the short time is look at 3 myths that I hear from students, see them on the internet, see them on YouTube. In fact, you have probably been tempted to believe these myths. Here's number 1. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect me. 71% of Swedish adolescents believe pornography influenced the behavior of their peers, but only 29% believed it influenced their own sexual behaviors. Isn't that human nature to think I'm different? It doesn't affect me. I'm different from everybody else. So I teach in a graduate program at Biola University in Southern California. And I still teach high school part-time. I used to teach at a Christian school full-time, Bible, theology, worldview. And I would tell my students, I'd say, we can talk about anything in class if we bring it back to Scripture and we're just reverent and serious about it. And one day, someone asked a question about pornography. This is with a high school seniors, 12th graders. And we're just having a conversation. I noticed a student in the back. He was a senior, stud athlete, great family, was one of my Bible students of the semester, and I could just tell by his body language it was affecting him. As soon as class was done, he came right up to me. It was lunchtime. He said, "Mr. McDowell, can we talk?" I was like, "No, it's my lunch break." I'm just kidding. I didn't say that. I said, "Sure, step into my office," which was a desk in the middle of my classroom. I said, "Hey, what's up?" Before that he could say anything, he puts his head down, his arms like this, and he just starts to cry. I went and got him tissue, and I said, "Hey, what's going on?" He said, "Mr. McDowell, I got to be honest. For 5 or 6 months," he said, "at night, I go in my room, turn my light off. My parents think I'm going to sleep. Pull out my phone, pull out my computer, pull out my iPad, and I just look at porn for hours." He said, "My father," and this kid loves his dad. He said, "My father's looked me in the eyes and said, 'Are you being wise? And are you having good protection of your eyes?' And he says, 'I've looked at my father in the eyes and been lying to him for months. What do I do?' First off, I said, 'Thank you for talking to me. That's the right step. We will get through this. God loves you. This doesn't change how much I care for you. But can I ask you a question? How has looking at pornography affected you?" And I got the same answer I always get, which is this. He said, "Once I've been looking at pornography, I cannot look at a girl the same." He said, "I cannot look at a girl without undressing her in my mind." It doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect me. Pamela Paul, a journalist, not a Christian, she said, "A single 20-something graphic designer told me he would find himself in bars, berate himself for the way he scammed potential dates. I'd be saying, 'No, her breasts are too small, she's not worth it,' then wonder, who have I become? Why am I judging women like this? It doesn't affect me." Gary Brooks, a psychologist at Texas A&M University, says softcore pornography has a very negative effect on men as well. He just talked about how it affected women. He says the problem with softcore pornography is that it's voyeurism. It teaches men to view women as objects, and I would say women to view men as well, rather than to be in relationship with women as human beings. You see what he's saying? He's saying what pornography does is it strips the act of sex out of its relational, emotional, spiritual component, makes it purely a physical act. So somebody looks at this physical act and begins to objectify the person. That's what pornography does. Friends, if you look at porn, you are conditioning yourself to treat human beings as objects. As objects. Pope John Paul said the problem with pornography is not that it shows too much of the person, but that it shows far too little. Now, what does that mean? You're thinking, how could pornography be about showing too much instead of too little? Because what pornography does is it takes the design for sex that God has intended for one man and one woman in a committed, loving relationship for life, makes it purely a physical act. As a result, if you look at pornography, friends, you are training yourself to see human beings as objects you use for your pleasure. St. Augustine said, we're supposed to love people and use money, but the reality is we love money and we use people. If you look at pornography, you are conditioning yourself to use people who are made in the image of God and deserve to be loved as objects. Now let me come at this a different angle, because I think right now you're starting to say the idea that it doesn't affect me is foolish, and that's right. I want to think of something we're going to call a script. Now, when you hear the word script, you probably think of a movie script. Well, it's kind of like that, but I mean something different. I mean basically ideas in your mind about how you behave in different settings. So all of you have a bunch of scripts in your mind, whether you realize it or not. For example, when you got in the hotel and you got in the elevator, you have a script in your mind about how you behave in an elevator. Have you ever thought about this? For example, you walk in an elevator, if there's one person on this side, you don't go stand by the person and look at them. Right? That's awkward. You're also supposed to face the front, even though it's closed anyways. If you walk in and face the back, you would get the look like, man, you didn't get the memo. You don't generally talk in an elevator, right? There's a script about how you behave. In fact, that script is very different than, say, a library, how you act in a library. That's a different script than how you act here, and that's certainly a different script than how you act at a football game. Right? You go to a football game, what happens? Your team scores, you cheer. Ref makes a bad call, boo him, exactly. Give $5 to the person next to you, soda, nachos, pretzels, popcorn are coming your way soon. Try that in an elevator. Hey man, when the guy comes around, get me some popcorn, right? He'll look at you like you're nuts. Now here's the interesting thing. How did you develop all these scripts in your mind? No one sat you down, I'm guessing, and said, here's how you behave in an elevator. No one said, here's how you behave at a football game. What happened? You just observe the way people act, subconsciously build these scripts in your mind, and act accordingly. The question is, where have you developed your script about sex? Where have you gotten your ideas about what to expect? Where have you gotten ideas about how to treat somebody? Where have you gotten your ideas about the purpose of sex? Now, I can't speak for you individually, but I know your generation, iGen or Gen Z, unmistakably has gotten its script from pornography. The number one place your generation, you know this, about sex is from porn. The question is, what is the script of porn? Well, in a massive study of premarital sex in America, Mark Regnerus, a sociologist, said this. He said, demand for it in reference to anal sex is largely psychological in the mind and the result of a porn-inspired script about the anticipated pleasures of anal sex. People have seen it in pornography, they associate it with pleasure, so they go to real life and they start demanding it. This is how scripts work. So what is the script of sex? What is the script of pornography? I'll tell you. Number one, the idea of pornography is that sex is best experienced outside of a loving relationship. Trust me, sex is, not sex, sorry, you meant what I knew. Pornography is not about married couples with kids. It's not. In fact, you know what the word pornography means? It literally means writings about prostitutes. If you want to understand how porn affects society, think about how prostitution affects society. By definition, it's not about a committed relationship. So the idea of pornography is the most exciting, the most fulfilling, the most thrilling sex is a one-night stand with a stranger. That's where it's fun. That's the message of pornography. You know what the reality is? I document this in my book, Ethics, Ethix. I found the largest study, University of Chicago and University of California, Los Angeles. And it was reported in an article in USA Today, and the title was, Aha, Call It the Revenge of the Church Ladies. Isn't that an awesome title? You know what they said? They said, despite all appearances to the contrary, it's actually church women who know and follow biblical teaching on sex who are having the most and the best sex. Can I get an amen? Amen. Okay, good. I heard there were at least some Baptists here. Amen. Now, why would they say this in this article? They actually said, get this. They said, if you follow a biblical pattern for sex, you're more free. You might be thinking, that's nuts. Nuts. Isn't freedom doing what you want, where you want, when you want, however you want to do it? If I have to follow the biblical pattern, that doesn't sound like freedom. If that's your idea, that's because you don't understand freedom. I want you to think about it this way. A friend of mine took his youth group to play paintball. And by the way, if you play paintball, that quiet kid in your youth group, you want that kid on your team. Because that kid is nuts, and some of you know who I'm talking about. Because you're that person. You're like, quiet, get a paintball gun, it's like a whole different person. Well, a friend of mine took his youth group to play paintball. They were riding back in a bus, and there was an 8th grader, first time he played, he loved it. And he says this, he kind of stands up and he announces to the bus, he goes, this is awesome. I love camo, I love strategy, I love shooting people. When I get older, I want to be in the military. Well, there happened to be a military veteran who was there. Military veteran says, son, let me tell you something. Now, side note, if somebody who's a military veteran says, son, let me tell you something, that means sit down and shut up. He says, paintball's fun, because in paintball, there's no consequences. You get shot in the arm, it might hurt a little bit. Typically, you rub it off. Get shot in the back, fine. You lose the game, play the next game. Get shot in the face, you got a mask on. Paintball's fun, and you're free because there's no consequences. He goes, son, I've been in war. He goes, you get shot in the arm, you might lose your arm. Shot in the leg, you might lose your leg. Shot in the head or the chest, you might lose your life. You know what this article said? It said, actually, people who marry one person of the opposite sex and say faithful to that person for life are more free. Why? Because there's trust, there's closeness, there's intimacy. You don't have to worry about the other person getting pregnant. You don't have to worry about being compared to somebody else. You don't have to worry about the person leaving you because you're free to experience sex as God designed it to be. The other script of pornography is that all women want sex from men. Women are reduced to sex objects. Third, women, like all sexual acts, men perform a demand. Basically, women are sex objects to please men. And fourth, any woman who does not at first realize this can be persuaded with a little force. Isn't it ironic that Hollywood and pornography has been peddling women are sex objects, they really just want men. If they say no, they're playing hard to get. Then we have this outbreak in Hollywood, Harvey Weinstein, Dustin Hoffman, Louis C.K., and all these people are shocked that they would behave this way. It's amazing to me. Friends, I will tell you this. If any guy pressures you sexually, he does not love you, period. I tell my 10-year-old daughter, if any guy pressures you to perform something sexually, he does not love you, period, because he's thinking selfishly instead of selflessly what is best for you. Girls, you are made in God's image, and you deserve better than that. It doesn't affect me. I'm going to put a journal article up here. You can read this online. I'm going to go so fast you can't write it down unless you want to take a picture of it. Not long ago, I did all this extensive work on the whiteboard. I laid out, I'm like, students, did you take notes? They take out their phones and they take a picture. I'm like, I see how it is. So you can take a picture. This article, what the authors did is they went and took all of the peer-reviewed journal articles studying whether pornography affected adolescents. Those roughly say 12 to 17. And they brought it all together. You know what they said? They said people who look at pornography are more likely to be distracted by thoughts of sex, have more permissive sexual attitudes, believe men should be dominant and women submissive, accept the notion of casual sex, engage in sexually permissive behavior, engage in sexual harassment, be sexually aggressive, have insecurities about their sexual abilities, express insecurities about their body image, and have clinical symptoms of depression. It doesn't affect me. That's a myth. Second, I'll quit later. You ever heard this one? When I get the real thing, I'll quit. Friends, if by the Holy Spirit and accountability and God's grace, you cannot control yourself before you're married, you will not magically control yourself when you get married. I think the best way to look at this myth is actually look at brain research. You know, we actually know that in the neurons in the brain, there's 100 trillion connections. In your brain, there's more connections than there are in all the internet connections in the world. 100 trillion connections. If you can't grasp that number, just think of our new national debt. In fact, in the book Hooked, Dr. McElhaney says the human brain is without question the most complicated 3-pound mass of matter in the known universe. And I don't mean this brain, just for the record. Now, one thing McElhaney pointed out is people used to believe that when you reach adolescence, 12 or 13, your brain kind of became fixed like cement and would stay permanent through life. Now we know the brain is moldable and adaptable, what we call plastic, to your experiences. And the younger you are, the more powerful those experiences shape the trajectory of your brain for life. So if you look at the brain, we have something called neurons, which are brain cells. You have support cells which strengthen the neurons. And then I want to focus on what's called synapses. Synapses is how communication takes place between neurons. And I want you to write this down or remember it. Are you ready? Neurons that fire together wire together. Write it down. Neurons that fire together wire together. Neurons that fire together wire together. That means as you have a behavior, you have a belief, neurons and synapses are making connections that form pathways. So think about it this way. My brother-in-law took this picture of this monkey-type animal when we were on a safari in Tanzania like 8 years ago. It was awesome, and I learned something about monkeys. If you take monkeys and you sew their fingers together, oh, I know what you're thinking. What kind of sick person would sew the fingers of a monkey together? I would never do it to a monkey. I'd do it to a cat, but I would never do it. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Don't hurt animals. They've actually done these experiments on monkeys where they'll typically tie their fingers together. Now, why would they test monkeys? Because monkeys have a brain similar to ours and digits and brain pathways that control individual fingers. So they'll take these two fingers where there's different pathways, sew them together, and when they go to move either finger, what happens? They move together because the two pathways are fused into one. But then they untie it or unsew it, and what happens? The monkey goes to move either finger, and it moves them together until they retrain the brain to have separate pathways. You see, what happens is your behaviors form natural pathways, kind of like a path in the forest. Right? If you walk through a forest, no one's been there, you could go a variety of different directions. But when you walk somewhere, it beats down the brush, so to speak. You keep walking there, what happens? It forms a pathway. Somebody automatically walks down without even thinking about it. This is what our behavior does. It forms pathways we naturally operate down like habits. One more example that might help. I want to think of something, and guys, you want to write this down, called love apples. All right? So in the Middle Ages, people couldn't text each other, check Instagram, Facebook updates, Snapchat. They couldn't even go the extra mile and pick up the phone and call somebody. They were sometimes months away because of war or business. So someone got an idea that a lover would miss his beloved. So they'd take an apple, they would cut it up into slices, and they would give the girl the slice. She would put it in her armpit for hours. It would soak up her scent, give it to her lover. When he's gone and missed her, he could bring it out and go, it's like she's here. Now, I noticed all of you just stopped taking notes, except that guy. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Now, why are you looking at me like that is nasty? You know why? because it is nasty, for one. But second, shh. You have been raised in a culture that really from the moment you're born resists body odor. It's true. We regularly shower, then put on deodorant, and then get a little swagger or Axe spray to try to smell good. This is not true in every culture. Don't believe me? Just go to France. Friends, throughout the history of the world, most people could not just take showers like we do, put on deodorant and have cologne. So babies were born into this world, and from the earliest moment, their brains were formed to not only find body odor not repulsive, but actually attractive. So all other things being equal, if I imported you back 1,000 years and you heard about love apples, you'd be like, man, that is a good idea. That's worth the whole conference. But because your brain has been trained differently, you look at it from a different perspective. Now, why does this matter, friends? From your earliest moments in life, your experiences shape the physical structure of your brain. If you look at pornography, you are physically shaping the structure of your brain to go down certain pathways when it comes to sexuality. In fact, throw the next slide up there for me. Here's the way I put it. In fact, Pamela Paul said, boys who look at pornography excessively become men who connect arousal purely with the physical, losing the ability to become attracted by the particular features of a given partner. Instead, they recreate images from pornography in their brain while they're with a real person. If you look at pornography, you are creating pathways in your brain to respond sexually to an image. And let's face it, nobody in real life matches up to an image. I'll never forget when I was, maybe 10 or 11 years old, my father was speaking. He was giving a talk called Maximum Sex. And a woman came up to him who taught at a major university you've heard of, a Christian school. And she said to my dad, Dr. McDowell, I don't know what to do. I've been married to my husband for years, and he cannot reach a sexual climax with me without a Playboy on the pillow next to my head. Do you know why? Because he had been looking at pornography, physically shaping the structure of his brain, and become unable to respond to the wife of his youth in the way God wanted him to. Don't tell me it doesn't affect you. Don't tell me, I'll just quit later. It's not that simple. In fact, another way that might help is something in the brain we call neurochemicals. Neurochemicals send messages throughout the brain. One neurochemical you're familiar with is called dopamine. Because dopamine, many will call this the reward chemical. If you take a risk, like you go on a roller coaster, when you're done, it's this feeling of like, because dopamine's flooding your body. In fact, if you exercise, what happens? You're pushing yourself physically. The body is rewarded with dopamine. Well, God has designed us when we take a risk or exert ourselves physically to have that natural high. You know what drugs do, like speed and cocaine? They short circuit the natural process, send a message to those neurotransmitters, and you get an instant high. Do you know the exact same chemicals like dopamine are released in the body and create a high in drug use like speed and cocaine as in looking at pornography? Yet the reality is, if someone takes a drug and they need a greater hit, what do they need? A harder drug or greater quantity. That's not true when it comes to pornography. Pornography, it takes variety. Someone will look at nudity. They'll look at sex, oral sex, anal sex, group sex. And if they keep needing that high and become addicted like many do, many will turn to child sex, and then many acting it out because of how powerful the brain is in the body. I'll quit later, it doesn't affect me. In fact, in men and women, there's another chemical called oxytocin. Some would call this the bonding chemical. That, interestingly enough, they've actually done studies that when this chemical is released, it makes you feel like you want to trust somebody. So they've done financial games where you have to invest a lot of money, high stakes, and they've given people oxytocin without realizing it. Those who have oxytocin are more likely to trust someone than those who don't. Now, this is interesting because In the Bible, we're told the various purposes of sex. Number 1, Genesis 1 is to make babies. Number 2, the two shall become one. Well, I used to read that and think, oh, that's just a spiritual oneness, until I studied this chemical and I realized that oxytocin is released particularly powerful in women a few ways. Number 1, when a woman gives birth, which is painful. So they tell me. I tried to be funny when my wife was giving birth. She gave me the death stare. Guys, I don't care how funny you think you are when she's giving birth, shut up. I learned that one. I'm like, I'm not funny. She just clapped. First time you've clapped my whole speech. That's okay. It's a good word. When a woman gives birth, even though it's painful, her body's being flooded with oxytocin to bond with a child. Second, when a woman nurses, oxytocin is released to create a bond with a child. Third, during sexual touch or sexual gazing. That means being sexually active with somebody or looking at pornography. This chemical, which is meant to bond people together, is released at inopportune times and damages the bonding mechanism that God put inside of you to experience that marriage relationship for life. Now, in guys, the oxytocin equivalent, it's not testosterone, it's called vasopressin. Vasopressin has actually been called by some the monogamy molecule. When this is released, it creates a feeling to be bonded to your kids and bonded to your spouse. Now, we've actually found most animals are not sexually faithful or monogamous, but there's this animal called a prairie vole that actually, a male vole and a female vole, partner up, have babies, and stay faithful to each other for life. Pretty cool, right? Now, what doctors and scientists have found is high amounts of vasopressin in the males. So somebody got an idea and some funding that said, I wonder what would happen if we block the release and reception of vasopressin in these prairie voles. So what happened is they went in, performed experiments, blocked the release of vasopressin. And these prairie voles that would mate with the opposite sex, have babies, stay faithful to them for life. They blocked the release of vasopressin, and these little hamsters started sleeping around. That's messed up. Now, obviously, we're not just hamsters, but this shows the power of this chemical inside of us and how God has designed this to bond two people together. When you're sexually active, though, when you look at pornography, it's released at inopportune times and damages the bonding mechanism. Friends, don't tell me it doesn't affect me. Don't tell me just simply I'll quit later. Third is this: I'm not hurting anyone. You ever heard that? I'm not hurting anybody. Friends, let me tell you something. Every sin hurts someone. It hurts God, it hurts you, and eventually will hurt other people. In fact, there's a letter online, you can read it. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but the title was Anonymous Letter to Porn-Watching Dad. And this girl goes through how when she was 12, accidentally uncovered pornography on her father's computer. And she said, it devastated me. All your talks about how my value was on the inside, not the outside, meant nothing when I saw what you were looking at. In fact, I began to look at you and see your wandering eye as we were in public. She said, I began to realize that mom was not the only woman that you were looking at. I developed a distrust and in many ways a hatred for men. She said, in fact, when I was a teenager and my friends came over, I would wonder if you saw them as my friends or as sex objects in your fantasies. She said, I met a man, finally, she's older now, and I asked him if he struggled with pornography, and he said no. She said, but now, a decade plus later, I still have to work through this mistrust because of my porn-watching father. Friends, don't tell me pornography does not affect you, and you're not hurting anybody. Now, my point in this talk is not to make you feel guilty. My point is not to beat you up, but I found this. I found unless sometimes we're shaken up a little bit, unless sometimes we realize the gravity of our sin and how we're at a point in life making choices that are going to affect us for the long run, you're just going to sit there and buy some of the myths we talked about. So what do? One simple thing is I just recommend you do this. Every single one of you, your phone, your tablet, your computer, get software on it like Covenant Eyes or something like this. I have this for my whole family. Now, if you want to get around software, of course you can, but it's a natural way to build in just some protection and accountability into your life. So I would recommend all of you get Covenant Eyes. I use it with my family. Second is this, is to experience God's grace through confession and accountability. Friends, I know you're leaders. I know you go to a Christian school. I know probably quite a few of you here actually look at pornography. I know that just statistically speaking. I know many of you are sitting there going, gosh, if people knew what I've seen or what I do, they would never look at me the same. Can I tell you, friends, that is a lie from the pit of hell. Satan is the accuser. Satan wants to beat you down and say, shame on you, you're a leader, you go to DC as a leader, you look at this. Friends, can I tell you, Jesus died for our sin. That's your sin, and that's mine. It says in the Bible, he will separate our sin as far as the east is from the west. You know why it doesn't say north from south? Because if you go north far enough, then you're going south. If you go east, you are eternally going east. Friends, think of God like the father of the prodigal son who says, I love you. I am yearning for the day you will experience my grace. Because I found this issue will have a strong hold on your life until you know that you are the beloved. God loves you. He finds joy in you and wants you to experience the freedom that comes from living without guilt and experiencing the kind of relationships God has set you up to experience. Later tonight, you're going to go to your group, so I want you to promise me something. I want you to promise me that if someone in your group has the boldness to talk about the issue before, homosexuality or pornography, that you won't shame them. You will not go talk to somebody else about them. You will look at this person and say, I love you, I will stand by you, and that pales in comparison to how much God loves you. Now, I want you to put your hand up if you're going to do that tonight. Friends, put your hands down. I hope in 5 or 10 or 20 years, some of you don't come up to me and say, man, I was at that conference. You gave that talk, but I thought I was different. I thought it didn't affect me. I thought I would quit later. Friends, if you come to me in 20 years, I will cry with you, I will listen to you, I will pray with you, and God's grace will still apply to you. But my hope is this, that tonight, if you've wrestled with this issue, you will begin by just sharing with somebody. Don't bury it inside. The first step is you just say, I'm wrestling with this, I need help. And Paul said, when I am weak, I am strong. Friends, here's a video that I think we should watch together that's going to remind us how deep and powerful God's grace really is.